I had been dreaming about this vacation for years, but 2 days before the trip, my son texted me, "Hey Mom, we decided it's better if you stay home. Sarah and her mom think it's better to keep it just for the immediate family. We don't want you to feel stressed. You've already done your part by paying." I was replaced by my daughter-in-law's mother, all because they didn't want to stress me. Instead of being hurt, I froze the funds and decided to take the trip on my own terms. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment and let me know how far my story has traveled. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories and updates. Let's continue this journey together. I had spent the last 3 years dreaming about this moment, the vacation that was supposed to bring us all together. My heart swelled at the thought of our family in San Diego, California. I'd spent countless hours planning it, booking flights, arranging the villa, organizing excursions. This trip was meant to be a symbol, a reward for all those years of sacrifice, for every penny I'd set aside, for every holiday I'd hosted, every gift I'd given, every second I'd devoted to my children, my grandchildren. The idea of the trip had been mine. I wanted us all to be together again like we used to be, like when the kids were young and the world felt smaller, simpler. So when I told Lucas, my son, that I had everything arranged, I imagined the joy in his eyes, the gratitude, maybe even a little pride. I thought this would be the moment when all the years of loving, sacrificing, giving would finally come to fruition. I was wrong. 2 nights before the trip, sitting in my kitchen, packing the last of the sunscreen bottles I had labeled for each grandchild, my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the message. It was from Lucas. "Hey Mom. We were talking and Sarah and her mom thought it would be better if you didn't come. We want to keep things simple this time, just immediate family. Don't take it the wrong way. We just didn't want you to be stressed or feel like you have to do everything. You've already done your part by paying, and now we want to make sure everything's easy for you." I stared at the screen. A lump rose in my throat as the words sunk in. Not invited. Not needed. Not even a phone call. Just a cold, detached message telling me I was no longer part of the plan. I set the phone down slowly, my fingers trembling. The trip, the one I'd carefully arranged, the one I'd spent years planning, was suddenly, cruelly erased. I wasn't included because it would be easier without me. I looked around the kitchen, at the bags packed, at the tickets printed, at the carefully chosen gifts, and I felt a wave of disbelief. My hands shook and I tried to hold back the tears. It wasn't just about the trip. It was about years of sacrifice. Years of giving everything to them, financially, emotionally, physically. And now I was just an afterthought. The second message came in. This time from Sarah. "Mom, it's not personal really. But we thought it would be best if you stayed behind. You deserve to rest, and this is going to be a time for the kids to be together. We love you, but you don't need to be there." I could barely bring myself to read it all. The words blurred as I tried to absorb what was happening. They didn't want me there. They didn't need me. After all I had given, after all I had done, they were going to enjoy the vacation without me. I had been planning this moment for years, and now it felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. I sat there in silence, feeling the weight of the words settle over me. And then, in the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the dim light of the kitchen, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead for a place at their table. I had given them everything and I was done being invisible. I was done with being the one who was always expected to give, to sacrifice, to hold everything together. If they didn't see me, I would make sure I could finally see myself. I stood up and walked to my desk. The familiar click of the laptop turning on felt like the first step toward reclaiming control. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for me to make a decision. I navigated to the bank account where I had been funding the trip, the money I'd carefully set aside over the last 3 years. And I froze it. A small pop-up appeared. "Are you sure you want to pause all linked transactions?" I clicked yes. The next few moments felt surreal, as though the weight of the decision had finally shifted something deep inside me. No more would I be used. No more would I be taken for granted. This was my trip too. And if they weren't going to appreciate me, then they weren't going to get to have it. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the screen as the confirmation appeared. All linked payments have been suspended. The trip was officially canceled. But I wasn't going to let it end that way. I wasn't going to let their choices determine my worth. I closed the laptop and stood up, feeling a sense of power rise in me that I hadn't felt in years. The vacation wasn't going to be what I had dreamed, but that didn't mean I had to sit idly by. I decided that I would go, On my own terms. I picked up the phone, but this time instead of calling Lucas or Sarah, I called the women I had known from my church. Evelyn, Margaret, Sophia, Charlotte, and Diana. These were women who understood me. Women who had been neglected by their families, who had spent their lives giving without ever being truly appreciated. I invited them to join me on a trip. San Diego. Not as a replacement for the family they had taken from me, but as a way for me to find myself again. This would be our trip. A journey of healing, of rediscovery. And this time I wasn't going to be invisible. The next morning I sat on the porch with my coffee, staring at the quiet streets of Crescent Bay. It felt strange, like the calm before a storm, but I wasn't sure which storm I was waiting for. The text had been sent, the decision made, and yet there was a lingering sense of anticipation hanging in the air. Would they call? Would Lucas reach out to apologize? Or would they simply let me go like an old book they no longer cared to read? It wasn't long before I got my answer. My phone buzzed. Lucas again. My finger hovered over the screen, but instead of reading his message I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. Then I opened it. Mom, this is crazy. The payment for the villa has been declined. What's going on? Why aren't the charges going through? I stared at the screen, reading the message over and over again. The trip was falling apart. They didn't know yet, but the rug had been pulled out from under them. The reality of the cancellation was starting to hit. They had no way to go forward without me. They didn't have the funds to cover it all on their own. Minutes passed, then hours. I couldn't help but feel a bit of satisfaction mixed with an unsettling sense of emptiness. They had ignored me, treated me as if I was nothing but an ATM, and now they were stranded, unable to continue the trip they had been so excited about. But that wasn't all. I knew deep down this was the reckoning they needed. They were being forced to deal with the consequences of their actions, to feel just a fraction of what I had felt for years. A missed opportunity. I shook my head and picked up the phone again. Instead of responding to Lucas, I called Evelyn, Margaret, Sophia, Charlotte, and Diana. One by one they picked up, their voices full of understanding when I told them what had happened. Ladies, we're going to San Diego, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. We're going to take the trip I planned. Not for them, but for us. We deserve this. Each of them had their own version of the pain I just experienced. The exclusion, the neglect, the feeling of being invisible in their families. Evelyn hadn't seen her children in months. Margaret was always the last one to be considered for family gatherings. Sophia was taken for granted despite doing everything for her kids. Charlotte had never felt appreciated for all the years she'd sacrificed. And Diana was often forgotten, even by her own grandchildren. They understood the weight of what I was doing. Soon plans were made. Tickets were booked. We weren't just going to San Diego to replace the trip. We were going there to find ourselves again, to reclaim what we had lost in the years of giving without receiving. Meanwhile, Lucas had begun to panic. His phone rang constantly, the calls growing more desperate by the hour. I watched as the missed calls and voicemail alerts piled up, but I didn't pick up. What would I even say? I'm sorry, but the trip's canceled because I decided I was tired of being invisible? I wasn't going to apologize for choosing myself for once. Finally, a message came through. Mom, we're at the airport. We can't get our tickets to go through. What's going on? Please let me know what's happening with the trip. This is a nightmare. I sat back, feeling nothing but a quiet resolve. They needed me now. They were stranded, unable to proceed with the trip they'd counted on. They couldn't even board the plane without my funds. And they still hadn't realized how badly they had hurt me. It was hard not to feel vindicated. I'd done this not out of spite but as a form of self-preservation. This was a boundary I had set. For the first time, I wasn't being the one who gave everything. I wasn't the one who bent and broke under the weight of their expectations. And they were finally beginning to understand. Hours passed and still no calls. I knew that they had spent the entire morning trying to rebook flights and make alternative arrangements. But they couldn't fix what they had broken. I sat in Sunny Cove in the quiet of the afternoon, walking along the shore with Evelyn and Margaret, listening to the waves crash against the rocks. The air was fresh and salty, the sun warm on my skin. The breeze lifted my spirits, and for the first time in a long time I felt free. Not just from the trip, but from the expectations that had been placed on me for years. This trip wasn't about getting back at them. It was about rediscovering who I was, without the weight of their needs, without the pressure to be the one who always gave. We explored San Diego, walking along the beaches, taking a tour of the San Diego Zoo, and relaxing at the beautiful coastline. These were the moments that reminded me of what I had been missing, not just in my family but in my own life. I had spent so many years giving that I had forgotten how to receive joy, how to enjoy life without always worrying about everyone else. My friends and I shared stories of neglect, betrayal, and love. It wasn't just a trip. It was a healing journey. Together we laughed, cried, and found comfort in one another's company. There was no judgment here, no expectation of sacrifice. Just women who had all been forgotten in their own ways, coming together to remind each other that we mattered. The more time passed, the more I realized something. This was the trip I was meant to have all along. Not the one I'd planned for my family, but the one where I found my own peace and freedom. And when Lucas finally called, it was with a different tone. "Mom, we're stuck. We couldn't even get a hotel because everything's booked. What did you do? We're really in trouble. I don't know what happened, but we need you to fix this." I took a deep breath, letting the sound of the waves fill my mind. "I'm sorry, Lucas," I said softly, my voice steady. "I can't fix this. You'll have to figure it out on your own. Maybe this is the lesson you needed." He didn't respond, but the message was clear. I wasn't going to be the one to bail them out anymore. Not this time. The days in San Diego drifted by, each one more fulfilling than the last. I had gone into this trip thinking it would be a way to escape the hurt, a temporary refuge from the weight of my family's rejection. But as the days passed, I realized it was much more than that. The city had a way of settling the chaos inside me. The coastal breezes, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, the warm sun on my skin. It all felt like a release, like the ocean was cleansing me. The more time I spent here, the clearer it became. This trip wasn't just about recovering from my family's betrayal. It was about rediscovering who I was, outside of the labels I had worn as a mother, grandmother, and caretaker. It was about learning to exist without constantly sacrificing for others. Evelyn, Margaret, Sophia, Charlotte, and Diana. Each of them carried their own versions of pain, neglect, and sacrifice. It was as if we had all been walking the same path, carrying heavy loads, waiting for someone to finally see us. But here together we were seen. Each of us found comfort in the others, sharing stories of being taken for granted, of always being the one to give and give without receiving anything in return. Evelyn had spent years pouring herself into her children's lives, only to be left alone in the end. Her children barely made time for her now, as if her role as a mother had expired once they were grown. Margaret had watched her family drift away over the years, the holidays always spent elsewhere, her phone never ringing on her birthday. She had spent so much time trying to be everything to them that she'd forgotten what it was like to be everything to herself. Sophia felt invisible in her own home. No one seemed to notice all she did for her grandchildren, the meals, the care, the love. She was the invisible support that held everything together, and yet no one ever acknowledged it. Charlotte, although not the same Charlotte from my family, shared my experience of being pushed aside. Her children were always too busy to visit, and her sacrifices were never acknowledged. She had spent decades giving with nothing but silence in return. Diana had spent so much time caring for others, her family, her friends, that when it came time for her to need something, she was left alone. Even her grandchildren had begun to forget her. We weren't just friends. We were sisters in the shared experience of neglect. The trip to San Diego became something far more powerful than any family vacation could have been. It became a time for us to reconnect with each other and, more importantly, with ourselves. One afternoon we took a walk along the beach, the sand cool beneath our feet. Sophia had always dreamed of seeing the ocean, but life had kept her tied to a chair, surrounded by responsibilities. I watched her as she closed her eyes, taking in the salty breeze and the distant sound of seagulls. "I can't believe I'm here," she said softly. "I've always put everyone else first, but now I feel like I'm actually living for the first time." The others nodded in agreement. Margaret spoke next, her voice filled with quiet wonder. "I never thought I could do something for myself. I've spent my life trying to make everyone else happy, and what do I have to show for it? It's time I stop waiting for them to see me. I need to see myself first." The conversation went on like that, a thread of shared healing running through each of us. And in those moments I realized something. We were all worthy of love, respect, and attention, not because we gave but because we existed. We had spent so long pouring from an empty cup, expecting our families to fill it, But we had forgotten that the first step toward healing was filling our own cup first. That night, we gathered around a bonfire on the beach, the flames dancing and crackling as the night sky stretched out before us. The others had brought small offerings, things that represented their own journeys and struggles. Charlotte had brought a small stone, one she'd kept from her childhood home. Diana held up a picture of her grandchildren. Sophia shared a drawing of the ocean, something she had done years ago but never showed anyone. We lit candles for each other. Each woman took a turn saying something they wished they had heard when they were younger. "I wish someone had told me I was enough," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "I wish someone had told me I didn't have to give all the time. I wish someone had told me I didn't have to be perfect to be loved," Margaret added. As the flames flickered in the dark, I realized that this moment of shared vulnerability and support was the trip I had been waiting for. The family I had once hoped to have with my own blood was now standing in front of me, in the form of these women who had also been overlooked, neglected, and forgotten. But here under the stars we were all seen. We were all loved. The next morning, I woke early to watch the sun rise over the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the water calm and inviting. For the first time in a long time I felt a deep sense of peace. I wasn't alone anymore. I had finally found the family I had always longed for, not by blood but by choice. Later I stood at the edge of the beach, looking out at the endless horizon. San Diego had given me more than I had ever expected. I had come here hoping to escape the pain of being discarded by my family, but I had found something more powerful, a new beginning. The trip to San Diego had turned out to be exactly what I needed. The healing I'd experienced with Evelyn, Margaret, Sophia, Charlotte, and Diana had been transformative. For the first time in years I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like I was just the one who always gave and never received. Here I was finally seen, heard, and valued. It was a lesson I would carry with me forever. But despite all of that, there was still a piece of me that couldn't shake the thought of my family. It had been weeks since I had heard from Lucas or Sarah, and I knew it was time to face them. I knew that this was no longer just about the vacation or the betrayal. It was about standing up for myself and demanding the respect I had always deserved. As the final days of the trip approached, the last thing I wanted was to return home and fall back into the old patterns. But I knew that avoiding my family wouldn't solve anything. It was time for a reckoning, for a confrontation that I had put off for far too long. The day I returned from San Diego, I didn't expect much from Lucas. I had already made up my mind about the way I would handle things. If he truly wanted to make amends, he would have to do more than just send an apology. He would have to show me he had learned something from the mess he had created. I sat in my living room, hands trembling slightly as I sipped my coffee. My phone buzzed. Finally, Lucas. "Hey Mom. I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk." I took a deep breath before typing my response. "I'm home. Let's talk." And just like that he called. "I can't believe what happened," Lucas began, his voice low and apologetic. "Mom, I know I hurt you. I don't even know what to say. I was stupid. You were right and I'm sorry." I listened, not knowing how I felt about his words. For years I had heard apologies, but they always seemed hollow, words meant to placate, not to truly mend. "I'm listening," I said calmly, my voice steady. "But this time, Lucas, it has to be different." The conversation continued. He explained how the whole situation had snowballed, how Sarah had felt overwhelmed with planning, and how he had agreed to leave me out in an attempt to make things easier. And though he said all the right things, something about it still didn't sit well with me. "I don't want to hear apologies anymore," I said, cutting through his excuses. "You had every opportunity to involve me, but you chose not to. And it hurt. I'm not just some ATM you call when you need something. I've given you everything, Lucas. And it's time for me to give something back to myself." There was silence on the other end of the phone. I could almost feel him trying to absorb what I was saying. "I don't want you to make excuses for me, Mom," he said, sounding sincere. "I just want to make it right. I do. Please give me a chance." The truth was, I had already given him a chance. I had spent my entire life bending, stretching, and contorting myself to fit into their mold of what they wanted me to be. But now I had learned that true love and respect had to come from both sides. "I'm not ready yet," I replied softly. "I need space. I need to heal from this, and I need to see change, not just words. If we're going to move forward, it has to be different." I ended the call and sat in silence. For the first time I felt something I hadn't in a long time: control over my own life. I wasn't just reacting to the way others treated me anymore. I was choosing how I responded, and I wasn't afraid to set boundaries. The following week, Sarah reached out. Unlike the previous time, this call was different. There was no defensiveness, no excuses, just genuine remorse. "Marilyn," she said quietly, "I know I hurt you. I've thought about what happened, and I realize now how wrong I was to exclude you. I'm sorry." And in that moment something shifted in me. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't going to forget what had happened either. "I appreciate your apology, Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But I need more than words. I need actions. I'm no longer the person who will just accept being overlooked or taken for granted. And I hope you understand that. This is about respecting each other, not just when it's convenient for you." The conversation didn't last long, but it was a beginning. I knew that healing would take time, and I wasn't expecting miracles overnight. But what mattered was that I was no longer afraid to stand up for myself. As the days passed, I found myself making peace with the fact that my relationship with my family might never be the same. But that wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was simply a part of life that I had to accept. What mattered was that I was now living for me, and for the first time in years I felt empowered. I had been waiting for the approval and love of my family, but I realized I didn't need it to define who I was. The trip to San Diego, the friendships I had nurtured, and the lessons I had learned along the way had given me the strength to move forward. And as for Lucas and Sarah, I would meet them where they were, but only on my terms. The days that followed were quieter, but not in the way I had expected. I was no longer anxiously waiting for phone calls or apologies, nor was I pacing myself to meet the needs of others. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was living on my own terms, without the constant worry of what my family thought of me. I had learned to set boundaries, to not only say no when I needed to, but to truly mean it. And that meant my relationship with Lucas and Sarah would look different moving forward. I would not bend to their needs at the cost of my own. I had already given so much of myself that I had forgotten how to live for me. In the weeks that followed, Lucas reached out again. But this time there was no urgency in his voice. There was no pressure for an immediate response or apology. It was as if he understood finally that this was going to take time. "Mom, I know I can't fix everything overnight," he said. "But I'm working on being better. I'm really sorry for how I treated you. I want to understand how we can make this right." I was quiet for a moment, gathering my thoughts before speaking. I had wanted this for so long, to hear him speak to me with sincerity. But now that it was happening, I realized that actions would mean more than words. "I appreciate you saying that, Lucas. But the work has to come from you, not just me. And it has to be consistent. I'm not going to keep giving everything if I'm the only one making the effort," I said, my voice calm but resolute. He paused, and for the first time in a long time I felt the shift. This wasn't an attempt to make me forgive him immediately. It was a genuine commitment to doing better. "I understand, Mom. I'll prove it. I won't let you down." But I knew that even with his words, I had to let go of the expectation that everything would return to how it was. Things had shifted, and not just between Lucas and me. The whole structure of my relationships was changing. And that wasn't a bad thing. It was growth. I continued to spend time with Evelyn, Margaret, Sophia, Charlotte, and Diana. Our bond had grown stronger during the trip, and we began meeting regularly. We talked about everything, about our children, about our lives, and about our dreams for the future. We weren't just friends anymore. We were a support system, a family forged in shared understanding, compassion, and respect. It felt good, healthy. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to constantly prove myself to anyone. As the weeks went on, I found myself growing into a person I hadn't recognized in years. Someone who could be present without feeling responsible for everything. Someone who didn't always have to be the fixer, the giver, the one who picked up the pieces. One afternoon, while sitting with Sophia at a local cafe, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, Marilyn, I always thought I was just here to take care of everyone. I thought I was the glue that held everything together. But since we've been here, I realize the glue is us. We're the ones who hold each other up, not just because we give, but because we support each other in ways that don't drain us." It was such a simple truth, but it changed everything for me. We were no longer just women who had been neglected. We were women who had learned to lift each other up, to provide strength, not from sacrifice, but from shared strength and mutual respect. I no longer had to give until I was empty. We could all fill each other's cups. The months that followed were full of changes. Lucas and Sarah continued to make efforts, but I was no longer the one who felt responsible for making sure they succeeded. I stepped back, allowing them to grow in their own time and focusing on my own growth. And then one day something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed and I saw a message from Sarah. "Hi Marilyn. I've been thinking a lot about everything. I'm sorry for how I treated you. I've been talking to Lucas and I want you to know I respect you and all you've done for our family. I'd love to start fresh, but only if you're open to it." It was an apology. It was the kind of apology that didn't ask for immediate forgiveness, but simply acknowledged the hurt and expressed the hope for healing. I didn't rush to respond. I needed to think about it, needed to decide what this would mean for me. But I knew one thing for sure. I had control over how this played out. I couldn't deny the importance of family, but I could also acknowledge that family didn't always look the way I had imagined. I didn't need their approval to validate me. I already had my own worth. And if they wanted to be a part of my life, they would have to show it consistently, not just when they needed something. A few days later, I met with Sarah and Lucas at a small park near my house. It was an awkward meeting at first, but the words came easily. "I'm open to a new beginning," I said, looking at both of them. "But it will take time. I can't just go back to the way things were. I need to know that we can build something healthier, something where we all give and not just me." And as I said those words, something inside me shifted. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid to let them go if I had to. I wasn't afraid to demand the respect I had always deserved. And most importantly, I wasn't afraid to live for me. That evening, as the sun set over Crescent Bay, I sat on my porch, looking out at the horizon. The air was crisp and peaceful, the world around me quieter than it had been in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with where I was, and with who I had become. I had taken back my life. I had found my voice, my strength, my worth. And now it was up to me to decide how I would move forward, on my own terms. Weeks passed since my meeting with Lucas and Sarah, and as the days turned into months, something remarkable happened. The world didn't collapse without me sacrificing myself for everyone else. In fact, I felt a kind of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. No longer was I the one who had to carry the weight of everyone else's expectations and needs. I had learned how to take care of myself first, and in doing so, I had found something more valuable than I could have imagined. Peace. I spent more time with my friends, Evelyn, Margaret, Sophia, Charlotte, and Diana, and we continued to support each other in ways that were empowering. We were no longer the women who gave endlessly without recognition. We had all learned how to fill our own cups first, and only then did we give to others. This bond, built on shared experiences and mutual respect, had become a constant source of strength for me. One evening, as I sat with Evelyn at our favorite cafe, sipping tea and watching the world go by, she turned to me and said something that resonated deeply. "You know, Marilyn, I've been thinking, what if we could help other women like us? Women who've been neglected, taken for granted, who've spent so long giving that they've lost themselves." The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning. Why not? Why shouldn't we be the ones to show others how to reclaim their lives, just as we had done? And that was the spark. I began writing down everything. I started journaling the lessons I had learned, the mistakes I had made, the pain I had felt, and most importantly, the strength I had found. I wrote about my experience with my family, about the sacrifices I had made, and about the decision to put myself first. And then it hit me, I needed to write a book. It wouldn't be just a memoir. It would be a guide for women who felt invisible, women who were constantly expected to give and never received the love, respect, or recognition they deserved. A guide to reclaiming your life. I titled the book, Invisible No More, A Mother's Journey to Reclaim Her Life. It was raw, real, and filled with the lessons I had learned the hard way. It wasn't just my story. It was the story of so many women who had been overlooked, neglected, and undervalued. As the book began to take shape, I found myself filled with a new sense of purpose. It wasn't just about sharing my story anymore. It was about helping others. Women from all over reached out to me, sharing their own stories of neglect, exclusion, and sacrifice. I received emails, letters, and messages on social media, each one telling me how much my words had resonated with them. I wasn't just telling my story. I was helping other women find their voices too. The day the book was published, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride and relief. I had finally done something for myself, something that not only empowered me but could empower others. The success came quicker than I had ever expected. The book became a bestseller. As my story reached a wider audience, my life began to change in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not only was the book providing me with the financial independence I had always dreamed of, but it was also opening doors to new opportunities, speaking engagements, interviews, and connections with other women's organizations. I was no longer the woman who was constantly waiting for a phone call from her children, begging for validation. I was no longer the one who sacrificed everything for a family that didn't appreciate me. I was the woman who took back her life, who chose herself. I continued to set boundaries with Lucas and Sarah. They reached out periodically, and slowly over time I felt the relationship begin to shift. We were no longer operating on old patterns of guilt, sacrifice, and unspoken expectations. We were beginning to build something different, something healthier, but on my terms. At times, I still felt a pang of longing for the family I had imagined, the one that would gather together in love and understanding. But as I looked at my life now, I realized something incredibly powerful. The family I needed was already here. It wasn't defined by blood, but by respect, trust, and love. It was with the women who had stood by my side, who had seen me, and who had helped me see myself. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my home in Crescent Bay, the air cool and the stars sparkling above me, I thought about how far I had come. I had spent so many years waiting for my family to change, for them to finally see me for who I was, not just for what I gave. But now, I had learned that I didn't need to wait for anyone. I had the power to create my own happiness, my own worth, and my own future. As I watched the sun set, I smiled to myself, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. I was no longer invisible. I was free. If my journey resonated with you, I want you to know this. You don't have to wait for anyone to recognize your worth. It all starts with choosing yourself. I took the step to reclaim my life, and now it's your turn. You deserve to be seen, heard, and valued. If you're ready to live unapologetically, join me and others who are embracing their power. Subscribe to get more stories of empowerment, strength, and taking back control. You got this.